Gentlemen, men of ALAC, today we're going to be taking a little bit of a detour, and we're going to be looking at conscience, okay? Now, what is a conscience, you might ask? Well, it'd be fitting to know that we've been taking a little bit of our sweet time talking about the moral law and differentiating between right and wrong. Moral law. So the moral law is what tries to, well, the moral law is objective. Okay, we've studied that back when we did ethics. The moral law is objective. It is not subjective, therefore the moral law applies to all humans. When we look at this first premise here, do good, avoid evil, that means that since the moral law applies to all humans, every good act will be good no matter the person, and every evil act will be evil no matter the person. Okay? So that brings us to this thing called conscience. Your conscience is not its own separate faculty, it's not its own separate power, it's an extension of the intellect. The conscience takes knowledge that the intellect supplies it, and it takes the moral law, which every human knows in his nature, and it uses these to make decisions. Now, the conscience's goal, our goal, is to achieve happiness. So our conscience is effectively what allows us to weigh our decisions. So, for example, if you are presented with two options, either A, you come across, let's say, an elderly gentleman walking down the street, and you notice the man drops his wallet. Okay? It's making me a bit emotional thinking about this because I'm Romanian. The elderly gentleman drops his wallet. Now, all of my fellow Romanians out there, you know what I'm thinking. However, stealing the man's wallet is no doubt an evil act. Because deep down, we all know the moral law. The moral law tells us stealing the guy's wallet is an evil act. But our intellect supplies us with the knowledge that stealing the man's wallet will grant us a bit of extra cash. You know, that might sound appealing. So the conscience is basically what's there to weigh between your happiness and the moral law. And when the moral law and your objective of happiness coincide with one another, then the decision is easy. But the purpose of the conscience is always to make decisions in accordance with the moral law. Because if you make decisions in accordance with the moral law, that will bring you closer to unending happiness. It will bring you closer to sainthood. Okay, we can talk about using our conscience, and we can talk about relying purely based off of our emotions and impulses. You know, genetically, I have a very strong impulse to go steal that wallet. But if I allow my conscience a little bit more time to analyze the situation, I'm going to realize that I probably shouldn't steal the wallet. Okay, so that's your first point of error. If you never consult your conscience, you're probably going to be in error. The second time error could occur is when your conscience itself is in error, when your conscience makes bad decisions. And we call that an erroneous. So, an erroneous conscience, when your conscience is in error, when you make bad decisions, even though you've premeditated these decisions, it has to do with our reasoning, okay? That's a big word right there. That's pretty much the foundation of what we're all getting towards here. Reasoning. It has to do with this process called syllogism. So we start up here with the first premise, and we get more and more particular applications That's the word we're going to use, particular applications, until we get down to our conclusion, it is wrong to steal the wallet. Okay? That's the reasoning of our conscience. Now, the reasoning is where we're going to be making our error. Okay? Now, this error can come from two places. Either A, we made a wrong, I'm going to say, interpretation. Or B, we had faulty information. Like, maybe it wasn't a wallet. Maybe he was a terrorist. He dropped the bomb. Then it would have been good to pick this thing up and dispose of it. You get my idea here? If it wasn't actually a wallet and it was something very dangerous, then our entire reasoning here would be skewed. That's why your information that the intellect up here provides you is essential to making decisions. Okay. Now, the conscience does not always need to act in the moment, okay? Like I said before, the conscience can act premeditatively. You can make decisions before you come across them. You can make a decision in the moment. That's not out of the question. Or you can have already performed the act. You could have allowed your impulses and emotions to take over. You could have performed the act, and then after the fact, you could use your conscience to look back on the event and then evaluate its moral character. Like, I could have stolen the man's wallet purely out of instinct, and then 2 weeks later I realized, oh wait, nah, stealing's wrong. That man dropped his wallet. It was wrong to steal that guy's wallet. Like, you don't need to go through this whole process in order to make the decision. You need to go through this whole process in order to evaluate the moral character of a decision. So if you don't do this, you have made an uninformed decision. All right. So those three types of time periods when we make the decision: after, make the decision during, and we make the decision before. We got big vocab words here. After is consequent. During is concomitant. You can look up the spelling on your own. And before is antecedent. You've got antecedent conscience, concomitant conscience, consequent conscience. Mouthful. Memorize it. I don't care. All right. So, while we're on the topic of error, let's talk about ignorance. Okay? Ignorance focuses on this section right here. Faulty information. I didn't know. Okay? So we've got these two types here. Vincible ignorance and invincible ignorance. Alright? Both of them are ignorance. Both of them are cases in which you did not know. You did not have the information you needed. Okay? So the difference here is that invincible ignorance is when you could not have known. Therefore, you're not responsible, because there's no way you could have known. Vincible ignorance is you not knowing, but you should have known. You should have known better. Okay, what's a good example? Let's say I trip my friend on, I don't know, at recess time, middle school, throwing it back. I trip my friend during recess. I cannot claim invincible ignorance because all day, every day, the middle school teachers tell us bullying is wrong. You shouldn't trip your friends. You shouldn't humiliate them, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, you cannot claim invincible ignorance because you should have known. All right? There's no excuse to not have known. Now, in contrast, when you're a toddler, when you're 3 years old, 4 years old, you walk into a convenience store and you see mountains and shelves of candy, and you take some candy and you put it in your pocket while your dad's over, I don't know, getting flowers for your mother from 7-Eleven. I don't know if they sell flowers. Anyway, your dad's over doing his own thing. You see candy on the shelf, you put candy in your pocket, your dad pays for his flowers, and you go on your merry way. That's invincible ignorance. You're a toddler. No one told you that the stuff on the shelves you need to pay for. You've never heard of money yet if you're a toddler. You don't know how this works. That's invincible ignorance. Let's say you come across $10,000, okay? Now, that $10,000, you're provided with two choices. Either choice A, you can spend that $10,000 on a new computer, some nice hardware, some content creation software, a bunch of some mixers, some headphones, and you can use that hardware to, let's say, go into YouTube or content creation or something like that. Or you can use that $10,000 to buy a new laptop, a bunch of books, an iPad, stuff that will help you in your school career. Okay? Now you're faced with a decision. Do I focus on, let's say, content creation, or do I focus on school? Both of them seem like solid options. Both of them seem like career paths. So, what do? I have doubt in my conscience. So, whenever someone has doubt, they need information, okay? When you have doubt, there's one thing that you shouldn't do. You shouldn't act. You shouldn't make a decision. Okay? Because you will likely make the wrong one. If you are uninformed, you don't have the knowledge necessary to go forward with the morally better choice. Alright? So how do we get rid of a doubtful conscience? We don't act. We instead take the time to go forward and inform ourselves. Inform ourselves. So something like that would look like, wait a minute, I have no clue what I'm doing, I don't know how to use Adobe, I don't know how to use computers. Like 1 in 40,000 content creators actually make a livable wage. Like, this is not a good idea. How about I go with the school thing instead? Okay? Information is key. Because if you don't have information, likely what you're going to do is you're going to choose what appeals to your senses more. Okay? Content creation seems fun. You'd probably want to do that. You seem drawn to it. However, you need to look at the information. There you go. You need to inform yourself. Now, there are many ways to go about informing yourself, and that's where this comes in. So we also have a hierarchy of access to information. So we've got a hierarchy of levels of access to the moral law. So at the top of the pyramid, at the most broad spectrum, all humans have human nature, and in their human nature, they know the moral law. Okay? That's all humans. Now, as we get more specific to the Judeo-Christian component, they all have access to the Old Testament. Okay? The written works of the prophets and all of those that came before the time of Jesus. And then as you get more specific, you've got Christians who have access to the Old Testament moral teaching, plus the New Testament moral teaching, plus Jesus's moral teaching, the teachings that he made during his life. You have him as a role model. And then even more specific, you've got Catholics who've got all of this stuff, plus the church, plus the papal church. They provide moral teaching through moral tradition. I think that's what the word was. We learned it last year. Tradition. So as you become more and more and more informed as you move down this ladder, you are no longer able to claim invincible ignorance. Because if you're a Catholic, you should have known all the extents of the moral law. You should have. Not you could have, you should have. So you can't claim invincible ignorance anymore. Alright? And that brings us to objectivity. If you can't claim invincible ignorance, you might try to claim, oh, well, it looked right to me. your conscience is not subjective. And that's the really big part here. But the moral law is objective. Like we said at the beginning of the video, the moral law will label an act as evil no matter who does it, no matter in what situation. Okay? As long as it's the same act. So if your conscience is not erroneous, if you have a correct conscience, it will use the moral law to correctly distinguish between evil and good. And if it correctly uses the moral law, then it will make good decisions. And those good decisions will always be good. Because good is a universal, remember? Something that's good to me is going to be good to you. The moral law is a universal. Gentlemen, enjoy life.